What's going on, everyone? This is Ryandrew. Thanks for watching this video. This is an inking demo I did of a drawing by Jack Kirby of Spider-Man. So what I did is I went online, found this really cool pencil drawing by Jack Kirby of Spider-Man and printed it out on some cardstock. And this is just an inking demo where I am practicing inking with a brush. So I wanted to share this with you guys just so you can see the progress I'm making on inking with a brush traditionally. Yeah, this is a really fun image to start on, and in a minute I'll show you here the tools that I used and the process. So thanks for watching, and let's get started. Alright, so first up, the ink that I'm using here is Speedball Super Black India ink. I like this ink probably of the ones that I'm using. So I've got this one, it dries pretty dark. I'm also going to be using 8.5 by 11 cardstock that I printed this image kind of like in light orange through my printer. And I've also got a piece of scratch paper, let's call it, where I can get the tip of the brush pretty fine. I'll dip it in there and roll it out. And I've also got some adhesive dots to hold the image down on the board. These are Staedtler dots. I've had these for a long time, just trying to get rid of them. The brush I'm using is the Winsor Newton Series 7 Kolinsky Sable, but it is the size 1, not size 2. This is, I think, a better brush for 8.5 by 11 or a smaller image. First thing I'll do is I'll load the brush with ink. And it's important that you do what's called tapering, or kind of like getting the brush loaded with ink, but then also rolling out enough of it so that you can get a fine point with the brush. So this is what this little piece of scratch paper is for. It's just like getting the ink out on the paper first so you can get a nice fine point before you start inking. It takes a little bit. I mean, it's just getting used to getting the ink in there. You don't want to get too much ink in your brush. You don't want to get it up into the metal part of the brush and get all over the glue and all that kind of stuff. You just want to get a good amount of it in the brush there without having too much, right, when you're doing a fine line. So let's get started. This is a warm-up. I actually had printed like a larger size of this image on paper, and I just wanted to keep it so I could kind of like warm up and get my hand, my arm loose. The thing that I've learned with inking is you're supposed to ink with your elbow, I guess, essentially. And the reason why is you want to get a nice fluid line. You don't want to be doing like the jittery, scratching, sketching lines, unless that's your style. But I think with this, I really tried to practice how inkers would ink Jack Kirby's art. So I'm trying to go with like the traditional 60s era inking style for this. You can see I'm filling in some of the bigger areas of ink just to get used to how much it's going to fill in, you know, but that's why the size 1 is a really good brush for this. It gives you enough ink to fill in, but it also gives you a thinner line for a smaller image like this. All right, well, let's get started on the actual image. Here's the correct illustration printed out. It's not cropped off at the top or anything, so let's get started. So like I said, I start with the contour line first. I'll fill in a little bit of areas here and there as we go. But with this kind of image, I like to just get into the character and start doing the contour outline first. I'll work top left to bottom right as much as possible, but since I'm filming this at the same time, sometimes I'll do things a little bit differently while I'm filming it like this, just so I can get the shadow and myself out of the way of the camera so you can see what I'm doing. And please forgive the vertical footage here, vertical camera. I actually forgot to turn on my overhead camera when I was doing the actual image inking. So I had to use my phone camera, phone's in my left hand, inking with my right hand. I'm doing that for a few minutes here first before I switch over to the wide angle for my overhead. And like I said, I like to get a very solid, consistent line, fluid line all the way through in the contour without having to be really scratchy and sketchy. I think that it actually helps the motion of the image when you have a fluid line when you ink. And once I finish the contour, outside contour lines, I'll go in and start doing the mask and other parts of the suit. I tend to start with the eyes. I think that if you don't nail that down right away, it increases that chance of, I guess, the image failing later on. So I always start with the eyes. So here is the wide angle shot, finally, overhead camera, and I'm just going through and trying to throw in those areas really quickly where he had that like really blocky areas of dark where he wants the ink. The one thing that I really try to do with these inking demos for Jack Kirby is I really try to follow them as much as I can, follow the pencils. There are a lot of inkers who will do feathering techniques. I'm still learning, so it's like that's kind of still hard for me to do, is to master that feathering technique. So I'll just kind of go in and like just follow what he drew as much as possible first and just let those blocky areas of ink be how they are. I'm a really big fan of like Mike Mignola's Hellboy, and he's really got that like solid blocked out areas of ink. So I tend to do that for these Jack Kirby inking demos. There were a lot of inkers that worked on Jack Kirby's pencils. Some of the famous names were Joe Sinnott, Mike Royer, Vince Coletta. There are other ones. I'm not really as much of an aficionado to say which one's my favorite, but definitely you can tell that there's some variety in how they inked his pencils and whether, you know, they stuck really closely with what he had drawn or if they did a lot more feathering and texture work. For these, I'm just trying to follow as much as possible what Jack Kirby penciled in here. And then when there are areas where it's supposed to be completely black, what I'll do is I'll just throw a dot in there or an X. People will do an X. And so that lets you know that when you come back, you're going to fill that area in completely with ink. Going through here, just trying to line up the different web designs on his suit. I can see why Spider-Man would be a tedious character to ink all the time and draw, because you gotta do all those different little connections between the web strands on his suit. Another thing too with Jack Kirby's Spider-Man, he's like all of his characters, he's kind of like more blocky than like the modern Spider-Man is like more skinny and lanky. Jack Kirby's characters are just more blocky. They're just built different, I guess. Yeah, you're glad that I'm speeding this up, just all those different strands there, connecting those. That's fun. Trying to do that really fast. Another thing with these two is I'm trying to do this as fast as I can without being sloppy and just trying to learn how to like ink really fast. That's the thing with inking with a brush, is you can ink a lot faster and you can ink a lot farther with the ink before you run out and have to redip your pen. If you guys have ever tried inking with a dip pen, you'll notice that like you run out of ink like immediately. So inking with a brush, obviously you can see why a lot of the comics greats back in the day in the 40s, 50s, even before then. This is why they used brushes, because it made sense. It was faster. You had to crank out the pages as fast as possible. It just lets you do it a lot faster and get the ink down as much as possible. Another thing with the comics is, you know, reproduction back then was not as good quality as it was today. So you didn't have enough time and enough space to do a lot of the different texturing and cross hatching. I mean, you could do it, but it wouldn't come out that great when it was printed and reproduced on newsprint back then. And you think about comics were essentially disposable. They were not going to be something you'd hold on to for a long time. So this is, you think about it, this is why it was just, you know, banging out as fast as possible with an ink brush. You know, that's kind of the mindset back then on these monthly comic books and everything. Like I said, I tend to work top left to bottom right. I'm right-handed, so that makes most sense for me, and I'm not going to be dragging my arm or hand through ink as much. But for the purpose of this video, sometimes I'll turn things around so that you can see what I'm doing better. Another thing that's kind of tough to learn is like when to stop inking, when to stop doing it, or else you'll ruin the line. You know, that's always sometimes that can be a tricky decision. Like you really want to get that nice tapered line, but sometimes you mess it up. So you just kind of see, hey, do I want to try to keep fixing it or just leave it how it is right now? So I'm just putting a little bit of last minute touches on the different contour lines before I move on to the background buildings. Want to really make sure that I'm defining those nice curves pretty well. Some motion lines. I could have done these better. I just used a brush for everything. I should have tried to use like Crow Quill for this maybe. Alright, speaking of Crow Quill, so I'm going to do the background now. And I guess my philosophy on this is with characters, I think it makes sense to use the brush because the brush is pretty expressive and you can get that nice thick to thin variance on your line for like organic things, characters, animals, things like that. But it makes sense for me to, if I'm going to try to do some background elements, to use the Crow Quill nib to just get a really consistent, like, you know, no variation in the line width as much as possible because I'm inking inanimate objects in the background. Again, I'm sure a lot of people use rulers and everything. I just went through here freehand as much as I could, as fast as I could, so. Obviously, if you're inking on a computer digitally, you can throw your ruler on there, you can use perfect lines and snap them. I think traditionally, by hand, it's even if it's an inanimate object, like a building or something, a car, you still like to see that personal touch to it. Even if you're using a ruler, but still you like to see that there's someone made those lines. It's not just like a computer program, you know? Yeah, this is definitely not as fun as inking a character. Background elements, buildings, not the most fun things to ink. But I will say that Jack Kirby definitely knew how to design background elements, buildings. He didn't just throw up a block with some squares, you know, like, oh, there's an office building. He took time to design what he was drawing. This is obviously New York City, so he's going to have those like real world elements of the fire escapes and the windows and everything going on in the buildings. But like some of his more cosmic space drawings, like in Thor and Fantastic Four and stuff, like his and the New Gods and all that kind of stuff, he gets into like insane levels of detail that just, you're like, what is going on? Like, where did you pull this from, right? So I love that, like, even with stuff like this, like boring stuff, like background elements, he takes his time to really make it look interesting and real, kind of like, you know, what's going on in the background. I mean, there's really no other way around it. You just got to dig in there and just knock this stuff out, crank it out. I tried to put this on an angle so it was easier to ink with like just a more natural line, you know, just without using a ruler, but you know, it's not perfect. I'm just trying to ink everything that he's got there on the page. I think from what I understand and just like listening to different videos on inkers that Jack Kirby had on his projects, there were some inkers, I think there was one who like he would leave elements out of the image if he thought it didn't make sense or like didn't fit the image. He would just leave it out completely in these panels. And I'm not trying to do that here. Like sometimes I'll add a little bit of something if I feel like there needs to be, like it's not clear what's going on. I'll try to add in like some texture lines or something, but with this kind of stuff, I try to follow his pencils as close as I can. But I guess, yeah, it's like if you're working on a bunch of panels and there's a bunch of background stuff, I can see why you'd want to leave some of that stuff out if it's gonna make things confusing or too jumbled up in the panel, you know. But it's hard to tell. I guess for me, like for the purpose of these inking demos, I am trying to make sure that I get everything that he drew there on the page. Oh, and I forgot to mention this when I was going over the tools, but what I'm using right now for the Crow Quill pen or the dip pen it's a Tachikawa pen holder, and the nib is a Zebra comic pen, I think, G. I don't know what the actual model is called, but it's like a chrome pen nib. It's like a G series or something, but this is a pretty good pen holder and nib. There's different ones you can use, obviously, but it's pretty fluid. It lets you do a nice fluid crisp line on this. I like the Tachikawa pen holder over like a standard comic pen holder that you might find at the local Michael's or whatever, because this one's got like a little bit of a built-in cushion grip to it, and it's just a little bit wider. And it's made out of wood, so it just feels more natural when you're holding it for a longer period of time. So, and again, when you're inking with a pen nib, it just takes a lot longer to go through it because the ink runs out faster. It just thins out faster in the pen nib, so you got to dip it a lot more times than you have to do with a brush. And again, the other challenge with inking with a pen nib is there's a certain angle that the way you hold it and the angle that you hold the pen nib at is going to dictate how much ink comes out and what the line looks like and everything. So you just get used to that over doing it, you know, over a period of time. So. There's a lot of different exercises you can do to practice line width and control with a brush pen or a pen nib. I didn't really warm up before we started this, but you know, I could have and just knocked out some of those exercises. But I thought, you know, I'm used to using this, I'll just crank this out and get it over with, because it's kind of like a background element anyways. So I'm not trying to be super picky with the lines. Some of them don't even have to be connected, honestly. I can just kind of leave them how they are because this is in the background. And there are some areas that I left in the background that are supposed to be filled in completely, so I just switched back over here to my brush to fill in those areas of black in the building. Again, the areas of black here, you know, he put these at certain points. You want to get a nice definition of the different buildings, so you're going to use that black shadow to differentiate the different buildings there. I'm just filling in the windows, all the different areas that he had indicated were supposed to be solid black, and that indicates that light source as well. You can see it's kind of consistent with the buildings and also the light source on Spider-Man there. All right, well, that's it. That's the rest of the buildings. We finished up Spider-Man, and the last thing here is just a wrap up, just lettering, inking the lettering there at the top, and then also I'll put my name, my signature, I guess, for inking, and then I'll just put after Jack Kirby. I'm not trying to pass his artwork off as mine. I'm just doing these inking demos to learn more how to draw a good image and a good composition, and ink a really cool Jack Kirby illustration. So Hope you guys like this. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope it gets you inspired to read some Jack Kirby comics or to pick up your own ink brush and learn how to ink as well. That'd be great. All right, guys, thanks again for watching. This is ryandrew. I really appreciate it. And go ahead and keep an eye out for my next inking demo. Watch my other videos. You guys have a great day, and God bless.